Hello, welcome to the programme, and joining us is Gisli Orn Gadarsson. He's an actor and producer. Thank you very much for coming.
My pleasure.
You flew in from Iceland recently. Can you tell us a bit more about your work there and the fact that you're originally from Norway? Why did you choose Iceland?
Well, I am from Iceland, but I grew up in Norway.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So you're from Iceland, grew up in Norway, and then went back to Iceland.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I've also and recently I've spent a lot of time in the UK. Well, I graduated as an actor from in Iceland. I went to drama school there, and I started directing for the theatre, like pretty much straight out of drama school. And the first production that I did was a production of Romeo and Juliet. And I used to be like a gymnast back in the days. Yeah. So I directed it and I played Romeo, and I got a bunch of friends to kind of be in it, and it was my experimental production, like so you know, it involved circus acts and stuff like that because of my gymnastic background. And then I opened it in Iceland, and it was quite a success, and some English actors who were filming in Iceland saw it, and they suggested that this should be in England. You know, that this would be a show that could do well in England. Yeah. And I hadn't really been in England at that point in my life, like ever. But I sent out a random post to a lot of artistic theatre directors in the UK, and I invited them to come and see the show, ride horses, see the geysers, you know, Blue Lagoon, all that kind of usuals to try and kind of attract their attention. And one guy replied, and that was David Lan, who is the artistic director at the Young Vic Theatre in London. So he came to Iceland, and then, to make a very long story short, he invited the show over to England, and we performed it in Icelandic in Iceland, but then we did it in English in England, 13 actors from Iceland at the Young Vic, and it was an overnight success. Great reviews in all the media, and it was invited to the West End. So there we were, a year after graduating from drama school. I was hanging upside down in a West End theatre and having dinners with Sean Connery.
And you couldn't even imagine, I guess, how much you'd where the journey that you'd taken in a year.
When I got out of drama school in Iceland, I thought, like, the only downside is because it's an Icelandic drama school, I'll be working in Iceland for the rest of my life. And then 1 year later, I was like in the West End, and since then I've done countless productions in the UK and all over the world, basically.
But that's interesting, because you said that obviously you have an education in Iceland, but it's, by the sounds of your story, it didn't actually have a big effect on your career as such. I mean, I guess you learned stuff there, but it wasn't the sort of the final factor in you actually moving on in your career and exploring further avenues.
No, I mean, I had a teacher in drama school, this woman, and she basically taught us dance in drama school. And she would always, because the dance world is much more open, right? You have people like Pina Bausch, and you know, that they're better at kind of exploring the boundaries of what you can do, I find. But she would always encourage us to, like, you know, do your own thing, you know, create your own stuff, be your own, you know, creator or whatever. So with that at heart, I created Romeo and Juliet, and that, because it had like an original twist, I guess, it, you know, it's been all over the world since then, like Australia, Poland, Russia, you know, just, and the shows that I've done since have been like in that vein, and I've been very lucky. I worked with like a bunch of incredible international people, and then that's kind of led into me also, you know, being an actor in TV series in the UK, and you know, making a Hollywood film but that's as an actor, so that's isolated from the theatre world.
Yeah. So what do you prefer more then? Do you actually miss the days of working in the theatre, or do you like more now acting and the sort of the Hollywood star-studied stuff, you could say?
Well, I guess my calling is probably the entrepreneurial theatre background. I am a man of the theatre, most and foremost. I've realized that. But I do love acting in films and TV, because it's really different, and there's a totally different energy to it, and it really helps me to balance the, you know, with the balance of both. So when I'm like doing film or TV, I get like that's when I get all my ideas for the stuff to do on stage. So it's a really good mix for me.
I always find it fascinating speaking to actors and producers and screenwriters, because I always think of how they come up with their ideas. And for example, with the sort of gymnastics and Romeo and Juliet, I would never have thought of coming up with that idea, but you did. So for people who are perhaps new to the industry, I mean, whether they're actors or whether producers or script writers, people behind the scenes, that sort of thing, do you have any tips? Do you have any guidance for them?
Yeah, I mean, you have to do the work. It's hard work. You have to do the work, and it starts with a phone call, you know, or it starts with one letter, or it starts with, you know, you sitting down with a person and, you know, saying like, listen, I'm going to do this. Do you want to be a part of it? And like with Romeo and Juliet, I mean, you know, I found the venue. I talked to the artistic director there. I borrowed the space for free. So you kind of have to, you kind of in a way have to be a producer, and being a producer means like figuring out how you're going to do it and how you can afford it, because obviously I didn't have any money to create it. So like talking to all the other actors, I made a deal with them that they would own a share in the production. I couldn't pay them any salaries, or, you know, I couldn't pay the set designer. I didn't have any money to build the set, so I talked to the local hardware store, and they sponsored me a little bit. So Romeo and Juliet was made with no money whatsoever. And I mean, the ropes that we're climbing in the production, they're just from a local fishing factory. Yeah. The silks that we're climbing in, they're like curtains from a curtain shop. So none of it is.
So it really was like a DIY production.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find that's what you have to do with everything that you do. You just, you know, make it work. And then, you know, the rest will follow.
And tell us a bit more about your career now, because it sounds like you got off to a flying success and you've kept it on going since then.
Yeah, and it continues. I mean, I'm slightly stepping into a new field now, because I'm producing a TV series that I'm going to direct. So this is going to be the first time that I direct, like, for that medium. But it's called Blackboard, but it's because it's an idea that I've been working on for so long, so I feel that I have to kind of support it all the way.
And can you tell us a bit about this Blackboard?
Yeah, it's set in the 80s in Iceland. It's about the fishing industry. It's about a group of friends that go into the fishing industry in the 80s. And what happened with the fishing industry in the 80s in Iceland is that it got privatized. And so we're following this group of friends during this process, and we see how the fish in Iceland went from being a public domain to belonging to a handful of people and making them incredibly rich.
Yeah.
A bit like what happened with oil in Russia, or I'm sure, you know,
but similar
on this side of the world.
It's like a cartel.
Yes. So it's an important local story, but I think it'll have. I mean, I pitched it in Berlin, and I won kind of like the best pitch at the Berlin Film Festival for it. So there's big interest for it globally as well.
Yeah, and do you have to adapt the TV series when you think that it's going to go to a global market? Because often these, you could say, local issues in Iceland, I mean national issues, might not translate, but in this case they do.
Yeah, I think the more, and that's also like a point that I would make. The more local it is, the more interesting it becomes to a global audience. At least, you know, when I've done my shows, I've never thought like, okay, how can I make this, work for an English market? Because I have no way of knowing. I'm not English. It's not my background. It's not my, I can't predict what anybody wants to see. So you just have to follow your own vision.
Yeah. Well, even I couldn't answer
exactly.
that question, and I'm from there.
Yeah. And so I think it only becomes interesting because, somebody has the need to tell a story from their own kind of hard, I guess.
And are you linked to this story somehow, this fishing story? Were
No.
you affected, or do you know people who were affected?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's affected by it constantly because there's so much money involved in it and it belongs to few people. Whereas one could argue that it should belong to the population still, and it would solve a lot of issue if the money came back to the people, you know, to the people of Iceland.
The public coffers.
So and I basically created it because I didn't quite understand what had happened. So for me to understand it, I made this, you know, I'm going to make this series, and then hopefully everybody will understand a bit more what happened, and then there will be a proper debate about it, and who knows, maybe things will change.
Because often, actually, culture plays a huge part in this, about raising issues that perhaps sometimes taboo, perhaps sometimes they were kept on the down low, especially when it comes to business, and taking things from private to the public to the private sector. You're giving an inspirational speech here at Kyiv Media Week. What is your inspiration?
Well, my inspiration is, I mean, just don't hesitate and don't take no for an answer. There's always a way. I'm the living proof. There is a way. You can make it happen.
Perfect. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
That was Gisli Orn Gadarsson. He's an actor and producer from Norway and Iceland. You're watching UATV.